right. A massive system failure is how President Ramaphosa has described the cadre deployment process regarding some of the country's top state-owned enterprises. After the first day of his appearance at the Commission, let's discuss the significant moments with David Lewis, Executive Director of Corruption Watch. David, thank you so much for your time. He has acknowledged, there's been a lot of acknowledgement. He has acknowledged that things went horribly wrong. Let's just take a listen to that clip.
If one looks back, the evidence has been quite strong, and I think you've all but quite frankly spoken about it, is that there were improper or improperly motivated appointments. And you've quite fairly made a number of statements, and I will remind the Chair of those statements that you've made in that regard. Whether these went through the deployment committee or whatever process was followed, ultimately I think ultimately I suggest that the party must take account of it and take account for it. Is that not a fair proposition?
No, it is a fair proposition, and hence we said, even in our conference, the 54th conference, we say, we acknowledge some of these things that have happened. And we even had the courage to say, it is when we acknowledge them publicly that we would be able to take remedial steps to correct them, which is precisely what we are involved in now. Because we have acknowledged, and if you like, we've bared our chest to the people of this country. So yes, we will acknowledge and say things went horribly wrong. But we are here to work with everyone to correct those things. And we do so with humility. We do so in a way, also by bowing our heads and say, because we are, if you like, a feature of the superstructure of this country, we cannot run away from all these matters. We are here to build a democratic society in South Africa, and that requires that we must confront corruption, state capture, and deal with it.
So, David, the President acknowledging that things went horribly, horribly wrong. There's been quite a bit of criticism since he said that there's lots of acknowledgement but no accountability. Do you think that's a fair criticism? Or do you think perhaps we're underplaying the fact that we have a sitting President talking to a commission, acknowledging that the governing party has gone seriously wrong?
You know, I really hope, hi Sally, I really hope that that South Africans appreciate the unusual nature of a sitting president anywhere in the world being subjected to this kind of examination, you know, for 4 days. He's come there not to be praised, and he knows that. And it really is a symbol of our democracy that we want to defend, you know, at all costs, because I found it quite humbling and extraordinary as well, just to watch the process. You know, things have gone horribly wrong. You know, I think that South Africans tend to sort of fetishize the issue of deployment. I mean, the use of the word is rather unfortunate. It's very militaristic. It sounds like I'm deploying you to the Eastern Front kind of thing, rather than to some job somewhere or another. But, you know, every government not only appoints people who support its policy, but they're absolutely entitled to. That's why they contest elections, to get their electoral platform implemented. And they choose people who will do so. I mean, if you stood on a land reform program and the institution funding land reforms board came up for appointment, you're not going to appoint people who oppose land reform. You may not appoint all people who are members of the governing party, but you're entitled to say my program is land reform, and you might be a very clever agronomist and whatever, but your soundings against land reform altogether have disqualified you from participation in that. And, you know, this happens with every government across the world. I mean, in Washington, when a white man from Texas gets replaced by a black man from Illinois, the whole visible appearance of Washington changes. You know, the top 2,500 posts in the U.S. government change. People resign and are replaced. And I don't laud that, but it is it does happen. It seems to me the issue here and why it went horribly wrong is firstly, because there are very key posts over which the president and ministers have unfettered discretion. And that should not be. There should be an appointment process like the processes all of us went through to get our jobs. There should be an appointment process. It should be transparent. It should assess candidates transparently. It should be merit-based. But as I say, with that rider, that the governing party is entitled to want those who support its policy to be in position.
So, David, I just want to play a little bit about what he said about state-owned enterprises. And this does speak to cadre deployment and what went wrong. Let's take a quick listen.
What I can say is that there was massive system failure. And some of it could have happened advertently, where certain people were put in certain positions to advance certain agendas, as you are investigating now about the capture of some of those entities. And so what you're saying is germane to precisely what your commission is dealing with. And some of it was so hidden, so masked that you just could not see that a certain individual was there to advance a particular agenda. And that is why we rely on your commission to ferret the truth out so that we are able to see it. But as regards going forward, and which is where your commission will make recommendations and will be able to overlay some of the reform processes that we are involved in, we will want to have a completely new chapter. We must open a new page and be able to say, when it comes to state-owned enterprises, we've come from a horrible past that converted some of the really top-performing state-owned enterprises into the shadow of themselves today. So we now need to move forward with greater firmness in as far as populating not only the boards but the management with people who are capable, who are focused.
So you spoke a little earlier about transparency around cadre deployment, and the president too was saying it's important, that it shouldn't be hidden, that it is all out in the open, but at the same time saying that they don't talk about who is earlier in the testimony. He was saying we won't say who is a deployed cadre. That was my understanding. So isn't there an inherent contradiction? And then secondly, what would need to change to make cadre deployment continue successfully?
You know, I think that the emphasis is on hidden. And, you know, where state-owned enterprises are concerned, there is no process that is followed for assessing candidates for boards of state-owned enterprises that I know of, and I've been, I have to say, on the boards of several state-owned enterprises. I don't know why. but there isn't any process whatsoever. And there should be, you know, either you appoint a very high-ranking blue ribbon government-appointed panel to make these assessments and to, you know, arguably make these appointments, maybe subject to the president's final appointment, but like with other appointment processes, like with judges, he's presented with a sort of selection of candidates, and he has to select a smaller number of them. But there is no process, and so everything is hidden. And so if you have a corrupt person making the appointments, you are going to get cadre deployment in the swear word that South Africans consider it to be. But how you can make it legitimate is that you have a number of criteria for appointment of membership of boards of state-owned enterprises, and those, might be, merit-based, but they can include a provision that says you are broadly in support of government policy in the area of electricity generation or whatever it is that you're being appointed to, and that becomes, legitimate deployment of those who support government policy, but who also are competent and qualified and over the age of 21 or whatever it should be. But you need a selection process, and you need some rational, transparent criteria for doing so. And you need to know whose responsibility appointment is. I mean, the president said something today that interested me. He said that when a minister comes to the deployment committee and wants to appoint the CEO of a parastatal, my first thought is, well, why is the minister appointing the CEO of the parastatal? The board should be appointing the CEO of the parastatal, and they should follow the normal human resource prescripts and traditions and practices in appointing the CEO. Although I have to say one thing, and this is by no means by way of excuse, is that it's very important to get these processes right. It's very important to get the appointment processes right. It's very important to get the procurement processes right. But if you have a thoroughly corrupt government, as we had for 9 years, it's very difficult for those processes not to buckle. I mean, the stronger they are, the less likely they are to buckle. But when you have some president determined to appoint compliant people into important positions, and not all these positions are that important. It might be not that high sounding. It might be a procurement officer here or a procurement officer there. It's very difficult to resist that. But it can be resisted. And, I came away from this today thinking that the president, to the extent that he's writ runs, and obviously cadre deployment is an important party function, it has become so because of the corruption in the party. I came away feeling that he at least was determined to change them. Whether he will succeed or not is another question, but he seems determined to change it.